Payment cards and digital wallets were catching on before the spread of COVID-19. But the shift has accelerated now that we are months into the full effects of this virus. Back in March, the WHO suggested that people should use cashless transactions as the virus may be spread through contaminated dollars and coins. Remember? They subsequently said that they were misquoted, but the idea caught on and people began avoiding using cash. The use of these contactless cards and mobile apps and wallets exploded for fear of contracting the virus through cash, while even more stores opted to go cashless, right? Widespread lockdowns and contactless shopping gave an e-commerce a boost, and digital transactions increased even more. According to Venmo's CEO Dan Schulman, the growth of new customers setting up accounts each day is basically doubling from even before the coronavirus became a global pandemic. Are we on our way to a cashless society? And was this the plan all along? So, is the move to a cashless society just an inevitable process in a more tech-savvy society? Or is it a plan to have a more control and surveillance over our every move, including what are we purchasing? So as we know, all electronic payments can be tracked and traced, so our every purchase and payments are known by the government. Along with contact tracing and increased surveillance, it sounds like we are well on our way in Agenda 2130's plan for complete control over the global citizen with a universal banking system. Agenda 2130 brings with it a one world central bank with a universal global currency. Seems like the recent coin shortage and the increase in electronic payments are moving us faster and faster along this path until we are all under this one world order. The end of this cash may be very well mean the end of our independence as the deep state creates a global cashless system. Come on. Which is the ultimate globalist endgame, isn't it? Can you imagine a stranger not liking what you say and deleting any credits you have built up in participating in society, eating, drinking, getting food, buying things? Think about that for a minute. On our next Frequency Wars on August 12th at 1 p.m. Eastern Time, only on uimedianetwork.org, we welcome G. Edward Griffin, the founder of Freedom Force International and author of The Creature from Jekyll Island, who has spoken out about the global cashless society for decades. He is also joined by international journalist, the New American magazine, Alex Newman, as they discuss Agenda 2130's plan in moving us towards a cashless society and a universally controlled international bank and monetary system. What's coming next? And what can we do to stop it? Find out this dire information before it's too late. You need to know.
The time to defy the modern agenda is now. UI Media Network presents Frequency Wars, an explosive new series that examines contentious subject matter pursuing us beyond our five senses. This weekly series discovers the intricacies of imposing issues that challenge our daily existence and question humanity. Provocative and intriguing, we confront the issues and conflicts affecting us on a global scale and beyond. The commentary and guests will shift the paradigm and defy the status quo. What will you believe? Welcome to Frequency Wars, the next revolution. And here's your host, challenging you to question everything, Tim Ray.
Welcome to our next 2130 Agenda series as we discuss the 17 goals that have been and actively being implemented, and not only on a city, county, and state level, but around the world by power brokers generationally committed to bringing in the new world order of surveillance, control, and unfortunately, yes, depopulation. Today, we're discussing the goal of the one world monetary system with legend G. Edward Griffin. Yes, he is here live on the UI Media Network, along with our very, very faithful and good friend, Alex Newman. And we're discussing what's going on with our money and why it's happening. But first, I want to play for you all a quick clip on how long some of us have known that the communist tool for the New World Order has been in the works.
Any all-out minority revolution must create a state of crisis wherein almost all of the male population would be forced to remain in their homes to protect their property and families. The middle class is very large, but it is not accustomed to deprivation and terror. Because of its affluence, it has waxed soft. It has no stomach for massive fire, blood, and violence. The motive force behind its life drive is its endless pursuit of prestige, conspicuous consumption, and sensual pleasure. A few years of violent, sporadic, and highly destructive uprisings will set the stage for the grand finale. After the stage is properly set through protracted struggle, America could be brought to her knees in 90 days of highly organized, fierce fighting, sabotage, and massive firestorm. Ladies and gentlemen, the plans and preparations for a communist revolution of force and violence are far advanced. The organization behind these preparations has almost unlimited financial resources, and it provides both training and leadership based upon years of experience in many other countries. Our enemies are deadly serious about their task, and it's nothing short of national suicide for us to continue to ignore their plans and their progress.
All right. Well, I'll tell you what, how prophetic was that, right? And that was back in 1969, right? And you only get better looking. G. Ed Griffin, welcome to the show. Alex Newman, welcome. So, do you remember that moment, sharing that on film?
Yes, I do now, because the silly thing, I shouldn't say silly thing, it's silly that all of a sudden it surfaced and went viral here a few months ago, and I had almost forgotten about it. And somebody said, yeah, I saw you on the tube the other night talking about communist revolution in America. And I said, what? Why? No, I haven't done that. And of course, they sent me the link, and there I was, 1969, with my little narrow tie and the sideburns and the whole thing.
So Ed, how do you think about today? And would you think you'd be alive seeing the orchestrated crisis that's occurring now with the New World Order and the power brokers involved? Would you think you'd actually see this stage of the progress at this point, or you think you'd be long gone by then?
That's a good question. I'm trying to rewind my brain back to that period. I think, in all honesty, I did not think I would see it. And if I did, I thought it would be more foreign originated. In other words, usually when the Marxist-Leninists plan to take over a country, that the people, yeah, sure, they have their local citizens, but you're aware that Moscow was behind it and funding it and all that sort of thing. I didn't dream that it would be coming from our own ranks quite as much as it did this time.
Right.
But no, I have to say that back in 1969, I thought we would lick this thing. I thought all we had to do was just explain it to people. Once they understood, they say, oh, I get it. We're not going to let that happen. And they would take steps to prevent it from happening. I really believed that. And I still do, by the way. But we're so much closer to the edge now. Our time is running out. It's actually beginning to happen.
Yeah. And Alex, Owen, both of you guys comment on this question. But, what Ed's saying there is, you think we'd have licked it by now, especially, people like him were talking about it decades ago. However, would you say that it's probably more likely we have been involved, or our government has been compromised in a communistic perspective, if you want to just use that word, for a while now, but they're just recently showing overtly how much control they've had for a while, and we just haven't known about it, and why it hasn't been an outside takeover, but more so of an inside job here? Oh, I lost your voice there. Ed, there you go. Say something. Go ahead, Ed. Go ahead, Alex.
So back in 1960,
he's coming in and out. Take off frequency wars, Ashley. Maybe that's what it is. All right, so we're having a little technical difficulty with Alex. We'll get back to you. Ed, do you want to answer that question while we figure out what's going on with Alex? Do you think we've already been compromised? This is just them showing us where they are right now?
Absolutely. It's like the best analogy I can think of is that after a rainstorm, you look out at the front lawn and all of a sudden there are 10,000 mushrooms. And you think, where in the heck did those mushrooms come from? You don't realize that actually the spores for these mushrooms were there a long, long time ago. And all it needed was the right moment, the right rain, or the right temperature. And there they were. So I was aware back when I was, back in the 60s when I was first becoming a student of all of these things, that the plan was for the Communist Party, USA, was to load up all of the power centers of the United States with their agents. And that doesn't mean that their agents were always the guys running around advocating communism. Their most powerful agents were the ones that were saying they were not communists. And even the most powerful in that group were those that were saying they were anti-communist. That was part of the Leninist strategy that I realized. Lenin wrote very eloquently on this topic, a lot of essays in his books. And if you go to communist bookstores, I used to do, and buy all that stuff and read Lenin, he was very clear. He said, comrades, if we're trying to take over a country that has its own culture and its nationalistic pride and all that, do you go in there and tell them that, no, you want to make this internationalism and we're going to take away your sovereignty and we're going to bring communism to your country? No. You say that you're an anti-communist, and you are the strongest anti-communist that there is as far as your words are concerned. So people will trust you, and they will elect you or choose you as their leader. And then once you're in charge, you can betray them. And that's, I was well aware of that back then. And that's exactly what's happened. They penetrated our government, our media, our school system, our church organizations, our labor unions, all of the power centers of society. And this is not just me saying it, it's them saying it. They said that was their strategy, and then they often brag about the progress that they're making. So this is not really something
check, 1, 2, check.
Yeah. So to answer your question short, I'd like to hear Alex's response to that too, is that absolutely the answer is yes, they have been there for a long time.
Alex, I don't know if you heard Ed there, but do you concur?
Yeah, absolutely. Back in 1969, when Ed originally made that video, the communist terrorists were not really mainstream. I mean, they were out bombing buildings. Bill Ayers is, I think, a really, really good example that illustrates the whole point. This is a guy who was working with hostile foreign communist powers, especially Cuban intelligence, the DGI, and they were bombing, his terror group, the Weather Underground. They bombed the Pentagon, they bombed the Capitol, they bombed the State Department, they murdered police officers, they bombed the funerals of those police officers. But mainstream American society recoiled in horror. They thought, who are these maniacs? And why are they blowing up our stuff? Why do they hate us? Why do they hate our country? Fast forward a few decades, and you have a young guy in Illinois named Barack Hussein Obama starting his political career in the living room of Bill Ayers. And still back then, they were not mainstream. Bill Ayers gave up his terrorism and went into education, but they still weren't mainstream. They were already poisoning the minds of America's children, but people still frowned upon this sort of stuff. Fast forward another couple decades, and Barack Hussein Obama, the no-name senator from Illinois, who just apparently came out of nowhere, is on his way to the Oval Office and bringing in all of these comrades with him. Linda Darling Hammond is an excellent example. A very close associate of Bill Ayers was running the transition team. So we are now at the point, and I don't think Trump falls in this category, but we are now at the point where the enemy is within the gates. The enemy is now in control of large segments of our government, certainly large segments of the media. And that's why now when you see almost the same type of stuff that we were seeing in the 1960s, and I wouldn't be born until 20 years after that, but even the stuff that we were seeing back in the 1960s, now the media looks at it and says, oh, how wonderful. We're tearing down systematic oppression and we're pursuing justice and all this kind of stuff. So that's how much things have changed in that short period. But listening to that Ed video, I mean, you'd think the guy was a prophet or something. It's pretty incredible.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's amazing how it has been a psychological warfare, if not since '69, but prior to that, I'm sure, to actually get the American people convinced to say, hey, guys, every communistic talking point is what we now believe, and we're being taught, as Ed said earlier, in the school system to actually believe as a communist. So once you have their beliefs convinced, Ed, once you have the psychological warfare won, I mean, you're talking about it took decades to get the mindsets of, I don't know, maybe majority or half the people at least. 7 out of 10 kids now are socialist thinking people, kids, right? So Ed, I mean, it seems like the way back is just bringing it to people's attention is not going to be enough. So what I'd like to talk about today, guys, is, and Ed, I'll start out with you because you wrote the book, of course, Creature from the Jekyll Island. And I believe you guys may be having a expo, a Red Pill Expo coming up on Jekyll Island this year. So more to come on that. But I'd like to talk a little bit about the past, like little cliff notes. How are United States handed over its own ability to create its own currency for the Americans to the international bankers? And then I'd like to progress with you, Ed and Alex, to the present, where we are today, from IMF to how we got where we are to the $6 trillion being left, to what to expect in the near future and our future if we move towards this digital currency, which looks like we're moving very fast at warp speed, as Trump says, other people say. So, Ed, tell us a little bit about how did that happen? How did we just, you're talking about the turn of the century, right? The 19th century, in near 20s, maybe 1800s, But how did we actually lose our ability to print our own money?
Okay, that's a part of the history I think that's very, very fascinating. But before I touch on that, I'd like to just give you an advance warning of where I'd like to see this conversation go as we progress.
Yeah.
Because it's a bridge. It's a bridge between the two movements that we are talking about today that seem to be unrelated but are totally related. One is what we're calling now the communist revolution, the violent phase of communist revolution. And as you probably remember from that old video that you played, there's another part to the revolution. There's a violent and a nonviolent revolution that takes place in more advanced countries like ours, and that's really what they're relying on here. The violent revolution is to scare everybody into accepting legislation that really will get us to communism without ever using the word. So the violent revolution in a country like ours, where we have a strong parliamentary tradition, people like to think they're participating in their own political destiny. We're not going to be taken over by force and violence. And so the whole role of that primarily is to frighten people into being willing to surrender their sovereignty and to surrender their judicial system and make these tremendous legislative reforms supposedly to put an end to the cause of this violence. But in reality, it's all about to legislate ourselves into communism legally and not through force and violence. And so those two things work back and forth very, very well if you understand the strategy. Strategy is really brilliant. And so that's the part we're talking about now. And now we want to transition to the banks. And many people might think, well, what's the connection? Aren't the banks capitalists? And these guys are communists, and aren't they on opposite sides and so forth? And how come everything seems to be working together? And I just want to mention that we mustn't forget that ideology is very important here. And these words that we give it, like communism, socialism, fascism, Nazism, all of these things, Republican, Democrat, conservative, liberal, these words really get in the way because it tends to obfuscate an understanding of what these people really believe. And I'll just say this in the summary form. The truth is that what these international bankers believe and what these Marxist-Leninists believe is amazingly similar. They're not at opposite camps at all, but they're just describing, they are described, I should say, differently. But once you peel off the labels and you see what they believe in this thing called collectivism. And so they work really well together. It's why we find out that some of the largest, the most wealthy capitalists in the world funded the communist revolution. And they fund socialist revolution. And now these big corporations, which we call in America, those are the capitalist corporations, right? And they're funding these communist revolutionaries. How is that possible? Well, it's possible, and I want to make this point, is because once you lift those labels off and look down into the toilet and see they all believe pretty much the same thing. They want total government control, and they think that the government is there as a facade. People will look to the government and they say, well, I vote, so therefore the government belongs to me. But the reality is that the government really belongs to the people who finance the politicians. That means the guys that create the money out of nothing. And now we're going to get back to the topic that you want. So the bankers who create money out of nothing really are an integral part of this total control called collectivism. If we didn't have the bankers participating in that, collectivism couldn't exist. And that means communism couldn't exist, and fascism couldn't exist, and socialism and all those things. So I wanted to just spark, maybe we can get back to that topic.
That's perfect because it connects the two. Because as you're saying, without money, you can't buy off the media. You can't buy off wherever else. You control the money. You can control people because people respond by the dollar, right?
That's right. We are. That's one area where Marx was right. Humans tend to be an economic animal. And so he was right on a lot of things, but he's wrong on a lot of things, too. Those are the big ones. So, okay, having said that, then back to this banking question. Who were these guys? Well, they were representatives of the largest banks in the world, not just in America, but in the world. The banking interests were touched on Kuhn Loeb and Company, which was a big investment firm in New York, and they had connections with the Rothschilds in Europe. And anyway, all the foreign banks, all the European banks, The Warburgs were involved. But as far as the actual creation of the Federal Reserve System, it was least done by the representatives of the American banks, even though they had strong connections with the foreign banks as well. So the whole idea was simply, how do you form a partnership with the government to protect the banks and make it look like they were regulating the banks? And that cuts to the quick of it right there. Because back in 1910, when this thing was beginning to happen, the banks were failing all over the United States. They were practicing what most people would call a very unethical type of business. They were making contracts that they knew they couldn't keep. They were accepting demand deposits from people who would put their money into the banks, and they get a receipt that said, this is a demand deposit. You can demand it anytime you want. And the idea was that you're supposedly sitting in the vault, but it's not sitting in the vault. They turn it around, then they multiply it a couple of times, and they lend it out for interest. And they're only prepared to maybe hand out 5 to 7% of the money kept in the vault. So if more than 7% of the people wanted their money back, you've got what they call a run in the bank. And there's no money left. And then people get mad, and then the lines get very long. Then the banks go bankrupt, and the people lose their deposits, and it was a terrible thing. And so the public wanted reform, right? Reform. We're going to reform the banks. And so they thought, well, I got a great idea. Why don't we ask these very wise and honest politicians to draft some legislation to reform the big bad banks? And so that was just a perfect scenario for catastrophe. Turn to the government to solve a problem. And so the politicians decided they were going to write a banking bill led by Senator Nelson Aldrich, who is very close to all the bankers, a very wealthy person himself. The family was closely tied to the Rockefellers, et cetera, J.P. Morgans. So here's this very wealthy banker-connected senator going to draft legislation to control the big bad banks. Well, you know what came out of that? It was a cartel agreement. The members of these banks went into a secret meeting on Jekyll Island in Georgia, where nobody could pry into their discussions. In fact, they even denied that they were there for quite a while. And they had a very secret meeting. And I won't go into those details, although they're very fascinating. But the idea is that they didn't want anybody to know that all of these big banks in the United States were meeting together for some reason. And so the reason they didn't want it to know is because had anybody seen that or been wise to it, they would have realized that something was fishy. Here, all the banks meeting together, someplace in secret. And what came out of that, we find out when we get to study those papers and listen to the biographers write about it many years later, is that banks decided they're going to form a cartel, a banking cartel, no different than a banana cartel or an oil cartel. But it was a banking cartel, and the whole idea was to control the opposition, control the competition, make sure that no fresh competition would come in. They would regulate all the interest rates and all the policies that would be very much to the advantage of the big stakeholders in the banking community, and just control the whole thing, but in the name of banking reform. And so they drafted this banking cartel, and then they took it to Washington, D.C., and if you could imagine mentally using a big eraser, and from the top of the page, they erased the words that said bankers cartel, and instead they wrote on it, and it said Federal Reserve Act. And that was the only difference is what the title was. Then they took it to the dumb congressmen who thought, oh, yeah, this is banking reform. I don't understand it.
And paid off congressmen, too, back then.
Oh, paid a lot of them, yeah, of course. And a lot of them already had huge debts. And you're very nice to the bankers when they hold the mortgage on your factory and your house and your airplane and all, in your yacht, all that kind of thing. So, yeah, they had a lot of influence on Congress. And mostly, though, I think most congressmen and senators didn't really understand this thing. They didn't know what they were doing. They fell for the propaganda that this was banking reform. And they looked at, oh, look at the big, thick thing. I don't understand it, but it must be good. Look how thick and heavy it is. And it's the way they do legislation nowadays. And so they passed it into law. So now, ever since then, we're living under a bill that is essentially a banking cartel agreement. And we wonder what the heck happened to us. We wonder how come every time there's a financial crisis and it looks like the banks are going to go bankrupt because they don't know how to run a business. And so they go to Congress and they say, well, we're too big to fail. If something happens to us, the nation's going to go down and people are going to suffer. Little kids won't have milk and all that kind of thing. So then their buddies in Congress, as expected, will vote a bailout. So most of that money either goes directly to the banks to bail them out, or it goes to the big corporations that owe money to the banks who are having trouble making their payments on loans. And so they send the money to the corporations or to third world countries that owe money to the banks. 90% of it winds up at the banks,
Yeah.
either directly or indirectly.
Right.
And people say, what's going on? I don't understand it. It's because they don't understand the Federal Reserve System is a banking cartel. Once you get that in your mind, everything begins to fall into place.
Right.
What do you think a banking cartel is going to do? It's going to serve the interests of the members of the cartel. Period.
And it's not the American people. And Alex, that's once that moment in time, it was 1914, 13, when the Federal Reserve was passed. And of course, it's not federal at all. It is the banking cartel who runs the deal. Things got serious. It was very serious money, because you deal with money now, lies, money, talking about millions, not billions of dollars back then. And so as you position yourself in the power of the money, they control the legislators. Whoever controls the money controls the legislators. So it's not the legislators or presidents in charge. It's the people behind that. It's the international bankers. And they've apparently been in position for decades. So if we kind of advance that forward now, and I assume, the Rothschild banking system and these other families, as Ed mentioned earlier, are all incestually embedded with each other and financially, to the point where I think people marry each other from the different families. I think it's like the kings and queens, like you see on the shows on television, right? So, Alex, here it is. We bring it up here. How many banks? You or Ed may know. How many banks are not controlled, if at all, in this world by, says to say, the Rothschild international banking fingers?
Well, it's an increasingly small number, Tim, and there's some local credit unions that operate, kind of independently. But the reality is they're part of this broader financial system that is controlled from top to bottom by the banking cartel. And I think the most important book to shed light on this from an insider's perspective, you might be able to see it right here. It's called Tragedy and Hope. It was written by a guy who actually agreed with these agendas. He was very close to what we would today call the deep state. He was actually permitted to examine their papers for a few years. Bill Clinton actually thanked him when he received the nomination, the author of this book. His name is Carroll Quigley, for serving as his mentor. And he reveals a lot about the corrupt banking cartel and also the relationship to the communists, to take it back to what we started off with. He's got maybe the most important paragraph summarizing the relationship between the global elites and the Marxists. He explains that there does exist, and there has existed for at least a generation, what he describes as an international Anglophile network. And he says that this network operates to some extent in the way that the radical right, by which he means, anybody who's conservative, anybody who disagrees with this, believe the communists act. And he goes on to say in the book that the international network has no aversion to cooperating with communists and frequently does so. And so that's how you can have another book I have behind me. It's called Wall Street and the Bolshevik Revolution, written probably by one of America's most important historians, certainly one of the most important historians of the 20th century. And what he explains, what he documents, using official State Department records and other irrefutable sources of evidence, is that the Wall Street bankers financed the Bolshevik Revolution. And as Ed explained, we're being told that the super capitalists are at odds with the communists, with the Marxists, when really behind the scenes, they're all working toward the same objective. And certainly your useful idiots on the street, the kids who got a PhD in gender studies and can't get a job, they're pulling down statues and, they're painting their hair purple. They don't understand the big picture, but they're being used by people who are moving us toward this international currency system. And I think the next phase that we're going to see, and I think we're starting to see the beginnings of this now with the collapse of the value of the dollar. Reuters just reported a couple of weeks ago that the U.S. dollar has lost 10% of its purchasing power just since March. Okay, and I suspect that is going to accelerate. And their next big move, and they've been telling us about this, it's not a secret. You don't have to speculate or theorize or break into their smoky rooms and see what they're saying at their meeting. They're bragging about this now, is to move us toward a global currency. And so to go back to Tragedy and Hope, he says the eventual goal is a global financial system that'll operate kind of on neo-feudalist principles, right, where they're the lords and we're the serfs, and anything we get to keep is thanks to their good graces. The Bank for International Settlements being one of the crucial institutions, the apex of this global financial system. But they're moving us now away from the Federal Reserve System and toward an international currency system operated by the International Monetary Fund. And so 10 years ago, I wrote an article, a cover story about this in the New American Magazine. It was called Waking Up to a World Currency. And there was a companion article, The Move Toward a Global Fed. And even 10 years ago, they were bragging about this. You had leaders of communist China. You had leaders of Russia. You had the president of France, Nicolas Sarkozy, at the time. You even had senior people in the Obama administration. The reporters actually asked the Secretary of the Treasury at the time, Timothy TurboTax Geithner, because his excuse for not paying his taxes was TurboTax. But they asked him, so the communist Chinese are proposing a global currency run by the IMF. What do you guys think about that? And everybody's jaw hit the floor. Timothy TurboTax Geithner said, we're actually quite open to that idea. And the dollar collapsed. It was a big thing. But that's the direction they're moving in. And amid this crazy economic crisis that they have engineered, both through the corrupt banking cartel system and through the shutdowns, the lockdowns, and all the rest of it, they're now coming out in the open. You have the head of the IMF, a Bulgarian radical communist, Marxist, socialist, globalist, whatever you want to call her. Her name is Kristalina Georgieva. She's writing press releases and she's going on TV saying, oh, the IMF is injecting liquidity into the global financial system. And the catch is, they're not injecting liquidity into the global financial system in US dollars or Chinese yuan or Japanese yen or euros or British pounds or anything. They're injecting it in the form of what they call special drawing rights. Now, this is the proto-global currency that they hope eventually will replace the dollar as the US, as the international reserve currency. And then, you probably won't be paying at your local grocery store in special drawing rights anytime soon. But as the dollar declines, they're going to move toward this international system. And I think that's the next big event when it comes to money and the financial system and the banks. And it'll operate very similarly to what we have with the Federal Reserve System, right? It'll be fractional reserve banking. It'll be creating credit and currency out of thin air and then loaning it out into circulation, a scam if there ever was one. But it will mean the further erosion of national sovereignty. Obviously, we're moving toward a cashless society, and I know we're going to talk about that. The further erosion of privacy. Now, almost all the governments of the world have now entered into these tax agreements where they're essentially shredding any last remaining financial privacy. So we're really heading toward, to use a cliche, a brave new world order. And it's not going to be pretty. If you love liberty, if you value privacy, if you love your own nation, it's going to be a very dark time if we don't put a stop to this.
Yeah, wait until people start losing their private rights to their property. I think at that point, people will wake up like, whoa, this is serious. I can't have my property anymore that you spent generations living in. It will be part of the state. When we get back from break, gentlemen, let's bring it to present as we are. Let's talk about the $6 trillion that's went out the door, the ramifications, impact of that, and what are the countries that are involved in this bankers cartel, like these big countries, and the ones that perhaps maybe still not, are they the ones that we're targeting right now? Are we actually, through our ignorance, targeting countries that are fighting the battle of a one world currency? Let's find out, guys. We had Edward Griffin, guys, he founder of Freedom Force International, here with us today, along with, of course, Alex Newman, award-winning international journalist of the New American Magazine. Much more to come. We're going to talk where we are today, what's going on, the connection with COVID, as well as digital currency, our future. What's it going to look like? Scary times, but it's a brave new world because we're brave and we can create whatever world we want. We'll be right back. Don't go anywhere.
Hi, I'm Greta Full, president of Golden Home Services, a premier private home care service for seniors in Georgia for almost 2 decades now. We all have parents, and I know I love my parents more than anything else in this world. And because of that, Golden Home Services makes sure we care for your parents as if they were our parents. Call 678-242-0084 anytime or visit goldenhomeservices.com to select from our range of affordable home care services.
And the third value of massive fire to the communists is psychological. The average American, they say, soft and decadent, when he sees billows of black smoke rising from one horizon to the other, when at night the only light he has to see by is the flickering red from flames leaping into the sky, he'll become paralyzed with fear and panic. He'll run away and hide and do nothing to interfere with the guerrilla bands as they strike at the community's power centers.
Wow, there's some more, the paralyzing, that's what we're experiencing now. And interesting to know that this is all part of of an advancement. It's a hustle. It's a hustle to move this country into fear. So legislation now can come out and support more communistic, more totalitarian legislation like they're passing now in many other states. Like they're passing, I'm not even talking about the mandatory mask passing, but they're passing laws where people are getting fined for not contact tracing, up to $10,000 in New York City, where you could actually get fined if and stopped at the border. You have to show your papers at the border if and if you're not quarantined for 2 weeks. So Ed, this is scary times. I mean, this is in present where we are. You created, and both of you created the story of the monetary, how they got control of the money, this banking cartel, and now they own the legislators. At what point, at what extent are we, Ed, do you believe? Do you believe they own most of the Republican and Democrat governors, mayors, on the county level? Or do you think that it's much more, it's less or more?
Well, I wish you hadn't asked me that question, because I have a bad habit of speaking my mind.
Yeah.
And my quick answer is yes. And unfortunately, that's my honest answer. But the word most is a kind of an interesting word. I think we've seen, I don't know, I haven't kept count, but we've seen in my vocabulary most of these governors step up to the plate and do exactly what they're told to do by their international handlers. They all speak the same language. They all come out at about the same day. They have the same script that they read. They have the same justification for it. All the language is the same. So there's a central source. It's not coming from them. So what is that source? Well, we can only guess. We know that the World Health Organization, in terms of the pandemic at least, is that source. And we know that its little lapdog called the CDC is also a local source of the same thing. But it's even bigger than that, because other things are going on. We know there's the race issue and the environmental issue and all these things. And if you notice, all of the media and all of the politicians do read the same script at the same time, using exactly the same phrases, which should ring an alarm to most people, but I'm afraid it doesn't. Maybe they're not aware of it, or maybe subconsciously. But in any event, so when you dwell on that fact, and then somebody asks you, what do you think? Most of these people know what they're doing? And, well, I don't think most of these people know what they're doing, but they're doing what they're told.
Yeah.
And that's good enough. And so I think the word most is correct in this case. Most of these people are, if they're not consciously doing evil or playing the game according to the strategy, at least they're consciously part of the machine, and they're willing to be the cogs in the machine, and they don't want to make waves. So from our side, it doesn't make any difference whether they're knowing or unknowing. They're still undoing our whole system. They're undoing our future.
Yeah. And, to add to that, too, and maybe take it a step further, Alex, and we had this conversation in the past, and you gave your 2 cents, and also want to come back to Ed on his take on it, too. But my perspective at this point, I think we're being played a good cop, bad cop routine between Trump and the Democrats, that I think they're all involved, and they're all being puppeted by the international bankers. Now, a lot of people, it's a very unfavorable perspective to have, but just when they came out, when I saw Trump every day pushing this COVID-19, it's only had to lock down for 2 weeks, and then, just get past the curve. Every day, press release, coming out, pushing this agenda for shutting down these small businesses, moving forward with this banker cartel agenda. And then I saw right off the bat, the quickest thing, Alex, I saw the $6 trillion budgets being passed, right? And he was all for it. In fact, everybody voted for it except one senator, or one, I think it was Massey, right, a representative, I think senator. But he pushed it forward. He's all gung-ho. They got their $6 trillion, right, passed through that. And then I saw this backtrack, well, let's give it to the states to do all this stuff, knowing that all the state governors, Republican, Democrat, in my perspective, we're all compromised on some level. Otherwise, they wouldn't be going along with destroying small businesses to the tune that they are. 50% of the businesses in restaurants are never going to open up again. And that's part of the cartel agenda, Agenda 2130, which is online. So, and then, going back and giving the QAnon and all these things, these quotes here and there, I just don't see how Trump's not involved as much as the darkness of the deep state as the rest of the people who are compromised on this. But that's my take. Alex, you want to give your feedback on that? And then Ed, you could jump in as well.
Sure. Well, thank you. And, I don't think I can rule out the possibility that Trump is involved. I happen to believe that he's not, and there's a number of reasons. It's actually something that I've spent a lot of time thinking about. The $6 trillion bills, I think, are really hard to justify, and even more hard to justify was his brutal attack on Congressman Thomas Massie. I know Congressman Thomas Massie. He's a wonderful human being, probably the best legislator in all of Washington, D.C., a man of principle. And he wasn't asking for much. He just said, hey, let's have a recorded vote on this. And I don't understand why Trump went after him like that. But, I think in many ways, Trump has dealt some very serious blows to the deep state agenda. One obvious example as it relates to the pandemic is the World Health Organization. Now, under any other president that was up on that 2016 election, with the possible exception of Rand Paul, under this pandemic scenario, the World Health Organization would really become kind of a global ministry of health. And that was the plan. They've been grooming it to fill that role for a very long time. Well, how did Trump respond? He said, first of all, it's an attack poodle for communist China. We're not going to tolerate that. You've given us terrible advice. You've been caught lying over and over again. So we're going to cut your funding and we're going to withdraw. That is not something that I think somebody who's working consciously toward this agenda would be involved in. Now, I think part of the problem was that Trump got caught up in the fear mongering, just like everybody else. You had these studies coming out showing that 2.2 million Americans were going to be dead by September from coronavirus. And what is he to think? He probably has 3/4 of his advisors saying, "Oh my goodness, this is a cataclysm. Look at these studies. Look at this research. Everybody's going to die if we don't do something dramatic." And to his credit, most of the terrible policies that have been implemented that are really restricting liberty are actually coming from the state and the local level. And Trump has pushed back on these. To give you an example, the 4th of July celebrations at Mount Rushmore, he deliberately chose South Dakota because their governor had said, we're not doing the social distancing, we're not doing the lockdown, we're not doing the mandatory face diapers, we're not doing any of it. You guys have brains, God gave you brains, use them, decide for yourself whether you want to hide in your basement like Joe Biden or whether you want to go on and live your life. And that, I think, was really important. And if you listen to his speech that he gave there, one of the things that he's doing that I think is so important to him is moving the Overton window over. He actually hit the nail on the head in that speech on several crucial points, not just coronavirus related. For example, he said the reason we have this mayhem in our streets is because our children have been indoctrinated in the public school system to hate their country. That was, nail smashed right on the head by a sledgehammer. That one simple phrase blew the lid off of, I think, their modus operandi, which is to brainwash our children. He said, we can't tolerate that anymore. So I don't believe Trump is consciously a part of this. I believe he's been manipulated into advancing their agenda in some respects. But, as I said to start off with, I think it's something we can discuss. It's something we can debate. And I can't say for sure one way or another. I know people who are close to Trump, and they've been telling me since before he was president that he understands that, the New World Order agenda. Roger Stone, one of his closest advisors since the 1980s, told me that his dad was a member of the John Birch Society and a funder and a friend of Robert Welch. He told me that and there's a whole bunch of interesting things like this, right? One of his mentors was Roy Cohn, his personal attorney. Now, Roy Cohn was on the board of Larry McDonald's Western Goals Foundation, which was an incredibly important organization gathering intelligence on all these things that we're talking about. He was also the chairman of the John Birch Society, and the Soviet Union shot his plane down. His most recent chief of staff, Mick Mulvaney, congressman from South Carolina, he was the keynote speaker at the John Birch Society's 2016 dinner. Now, the John Birch Society has been fighting the deep state more effectively, I think, than any other group in America for over 60 years. And so when you have all these people around him who've been in the fight, who know what's going on, it leads me to believe that Trump is not part of the problem. He's not part of the system. Unfortunately, I think he's been manipulated and deceived on a few issues. And I wouldn't say he's a constitutionalist, which from my perspective is a tragedy. But, overall, I think he is doing what he can to, in his view, drain the swamp.
Alex, I hear you, and listen, I hope you're right. I really, truly do. For the American people, I hope you're right that there's somebody not involved in this hustle into the Agenda 2130. But from my perspective is, you could pomp and circumstances, you could position yourself in different states, you could support these, you could say whatever you want. But when I see the most critical points, you push in the $6 trillion, you push in the lockdown, now all of a sudden you're manhandling America for 4 years, and all of a sudden now you give all the power over the states, and knowing that the governors all were compromised and they were moving in this direction. But when I see results, where we're going, I don't see anything pulling back. I don't see anything pulling back. He may have a stance here and there, but that's just my perspective. The frog in the warm water. It's easier to move to a new world order right now if you have conservatives on your side going down with you with that frog in the warm water, if you have a conservative president versus if you had a Joe Biden in there, the frog would jump out of the hot water right away. People will stay in the warm water as they get more communistically involved. But Ed, that's my take. What's your perspective?
Well, I think this is going to sound like a cop-out, which it probably is I agree with both of you fellas.
How diplomatic.
Yeah. And there's not much I can add except one more thing, and that is that we have to remember that our enemy is a master at controlled opposition. I think that's been his most powerful weapon from the beginning. These people, I think, following the guidance of Vladimir Ilyich Lenin, who was very eloquent on the importance of leading your own opposition. They're masters at it. They don't wait for the opposition to develop. Like in the Federal Reserve, for example, the bankers created the Federal Reserve, and then some of them went around giving speeches and introduced the newspaper reporters saying, "Oh, it's that's a pretty bad bill. It's going to ruin America." And of course, the American people would read that. Oh, listen, Maude, the bankers don't like the Federal Reserve very much. Must be pretty good, don't you think? So I remember that. And that shows up over and over and over again in our political history. And I also am cognizant of the fact that Americans, for the most part, do not vote for candidates. They vote against candidates. It's not because they like somebody. It's that they hate the other guy. Yeah. It's always the lesser of two evils. I'm aware of that, too. Right. And I'm also aware that if you're going to have controlled opposition, he's got to do something good now and then to be credible. So you put all those things in the bag and you shake it up, and I come back and say, I agree with both of you guys.
Right. Fair enough.
But I think it's important. Here's my contribution, perhaps. I think that we have to remember two things. We can't disregard the possibility that we have controlled opposition in the White House. If we just ignore that and say it's impossible, we've made a huge mistake. So we have to keep our eyes open and not be naive that these things can happen. And the other thing is, it doesn't really make too much difference because it implies that whoever's in the White House makes all the difference, when in fact that's very little. If we think that we can accomplish saving the country merely by getting the right man into the Oval Office and everything else is going to be taken care of, we've made a huge mistake. So I think there's too much attention on one man. We ought to be looking at what's happening across all the broad spectrum of our power centers, government, institutions of all kinds, the media, everything. That's where our focus should be. And we will find controlled opposition in every one of those areas that we go into.
Well, and I think that's a really prudent and a smart approach for all of us. Like I said, I hope I'm wrong, and I hope Alex is correct. At the same time, we have to be open-minded and understand how controlled opposition works. That's just the nature of the game. We're not in charge. We're pawns in the game, so we have to keep our eyes open to whatever degree. However, I do think we have a solution. Now, in reference to what's going on with the digital currency, and it seems like this one world government, one world banking system, this international bankers, this banker cartel, as you mentioned, Ed, and I'll let you jump in first, and then Alex, you could follow up with them on this. This currency, this digital currency, we're starting to see now the movement of that more than ever before. I've just got news today. UK just went wide that they're not using coins or cash in UK now because of the. I think we lost Alex because of the coronavirus, right? And so that's a piece of what's going forward. And so Ed, with what's going on with the digital currency, where do you see this moving next? Like, here we are, present moment. People in the United States are not want to use coins now, and because they're worried about getting COVID, which I believe is a farce. But this is the makings of going cashless. So what are some of the steps that you see we're going forward that we're going to be seeing next, and why?
Well, I think that's pretty easy to predict without much fear of being wrong, because as Alex mentioned a moment ago, they've been telling us for years what's going to happen. And I would say they're pretty much on schedule. They've always said it's going to take a long time. A lot of adjustments have to be made, not only technical adjustments, but adjustments in the thinking of the populations of the world, because they're not going to want to give up their national currencies quickly. They have to be eased into that. And of course, if there's a crisis on on afoot. Then there's a justification for moving a little more quickly and so forth. Which is one of the reasons that we have so many crises is so we will move into the FEMA camps a little quicker and not complain, thinking it's for our own good. So the answer to the question really is yes, is the cryptocurrencies, the digital currencies. Of course, let's face it, we got primarily a digital currency today. Most transactions are done on credit cards. We really have one. But the difference between what we have now and what they're talking about is that we still have cash to fall back on. And we still can take money out of the bank, put it in our hot little hands, stick it in the mattress or whatever we want to do. We want to give it to a friend of ours and not let anybody know that we gave it to that person. We don't want to embarrass them or whatever our reason is. We can do it. What they're talking about now is a total different animal. We will not have anything except the black market to do these kinds of things, which will make all of us criminals, which is just fine with them, because then almost any of us could be picked up and said, well, you're a criminal, and so you have to be punished and you go to prison or whatever the fines are. So it's a means of really controlling the population, even though there is a black market for some kind of an escape. So it's coming, and it's coming closer, and I think that's one of the things that the advocates of cryptocurrency have to get in their mind is that what they've been thinking of as a means of escaping control by oppressive governments and greedy banks is perhaps going to turn out just the opposite. It's going to be their tool. And having a little private exchanges or currencies is not going to be the solution, because they all have to merge through some central clearinghouse eventually if you want to buy a cup of coffee with your crypto. And that's what people really want. So it's coming to a system exactly what we're saying, and we can see it coming. They've told us it's coming. The only difference is that they're trying to tell us it's going to be wonderful. And it's for our own good, and how convenient it's going to be, whereas some of us are saying, oh, wait a minute, maybe it won't be so wonderful for this reason and that reason, and don't forget this reason also.
Well, that's a
It's
lot.
coming.
That's a lot what Ed just said, Alex, because, this bait and switch, basically, everybody's getting into the cryptocurrency, into digital currency here, is a wonderful thing. And now all of a sudden it gives certain people in the world, let's just go with the banking cartel, since they're running the show, as we know now, that now they have control over, let's say, a credit system. And paint a little bit, Pat, paint a little bit, Alex, what it actually could look like with a control mechanism, a currency, a electronic currency control mechanism in the hands of these banking cartels, of what day-to-day life would be. Because if you disagree, if you're on a credit system, would it be a one world bank? I mean, a one world computer? How would this work? Paint what it could look like, and perhaps how it will be nefarious going forward.
Yeah, well, thank you. And one of the interesting things is that Christians have been looking forward to this moment for 2,000 years. Revelation chapter 13 talks about a day when this global system will be able to prevent you from buying or selling anything if you don't cooperate and take this mark, which, there's a lot of disagreement among Christians about what precisely the mark will look like. But there's been people who've been forecasting this for 2,000 years now, and for thousands of years it sounded absolutely positively ridiculous. Oh my God, we don't even know what's 2 miles down the road in the next village, much less what's on the other side of the ocean, what's on the other side of the planet. And here we are, staring in the face of a system that will very soon be able to prevent us from buying or selling anything if we don't cooperate. Maybe if we don't take their vaccine, maybe if we don't bow down to Black Lives Matter, if we don't support abolishing the police, if we don't give the knee to the global system. And it is now completely out in the open. Actually, we did a special report on the coronavirus in April. And I hate to say I told you so, but I did an article here called Corona, and you can find this on the internet, Coronavirus, Deep State Assault on Economic Freedom. And that was one of my focuses. I told people there was 2 stimulus bills introduced in the House of Representatives by Democrats. Both of them included the creation of something that we had never had before called a digital dollar. And you can read the definition of a digital dollar. The propagandists and the PR hacks all came out and started saying, oh, this is wonderful. And so I knew they were going to use the coronavirus in a major way to advance this agenda. Now they're telling us it's because of the coin shortages, because we were going to get coronavirus from the currency. That's absolutely ludicrous. Go look at the people involved in what they call the Better Than Cash Alliance. Go to betterthancash.org. This organization was created in 2012. It was backed by the major credit card companies, the banking cartel, right? And they all list their names on the website. It's not me saying this. You can go see who their partners are: Visa, MasterCard, Bank of America. All these hacks. The UN Capital Fund was going to be the secretariat for this alliance, and they just said, plain and simple, we got to get rid of cash. We've got to, that cash is what drug dealers use, it's what criminals use, it's what you use to do tax evasion. And of course, the banks are thinking, oh, more profit, right? Nobody able to do business without paying us fees, and the credit card process is the same. Then you've got the central bankers thinking, oh, we'll be able to do negative interest rates, and nobody will be able to take their money out and hide it under their mattress, so we'll be able to tax their money all day, every day without them complaining. And of course, the totalitarians are thinking, hey, this is great. Not a shred of privacy will be left. You will not be able to do any transaction, at least legitimate legal transaction, without the government and now global authorities increasingly knowing exactly what you're doing. So it's a terrible move. It is going to look like tyranny. It is going to mean that you must obey, and if you refuse, you will be denied access to the economic system. And that has implications no matter what your pet issues are. If you're liberal, conservative, libertarian, this is going to affect all of us. If you're worried about health freedom, what happens when you can't buy or sell if you won't take their vaccine or put their face diaper on? What happens if you're a conservative? What happens if you don't want to participate in population control schemes? Oh, well, maybe we'll turn off your mark, right? And you combine that with the technology that's coming in, Tim and Ed. Microsoft, for example, just this year, they patented, and you can find this patent filed at the World Intellectual Property Organization. It's the UN's patent agency for a cryptocurrency technology that is implanted under your skin that keeps track of your cryptocurrency allotment based on your bioactivity. They just announced this great reset: the World Economic Forum, the UN, the IMF, and the British monarchy. And one of the people, they had 9 speakers. One was from the Communist Party. One was the CEO of a technology company that produces these technological implants that you put in your livestock. They monitor the health of your animal, how it's breathing, what its blood thing, all kinds of data, and they monitor its geolocation. Well, how long until they say, oh, well, you want to participate in the economy, you're going to have to participate. And they're saying it openly. The 4th Industrial Revolution is the blurring of man and machine. And the head of the World Economic Forum said it in plain English. 4th Industrial Revolution, we're going to blur biology and technology and create a kind of hybrid system. So it sounds like science fiction. It sounds absolutely insane, but it is coming into view. It's not hidden anymore. And if you value your liberty, if you value your privacy, if you value your family, it doesn't matter what your political views are, you had better start to take this seriously.
It's so scary the way, because I think how you just explained it, Alex, is really just tip of the iceberg. It's much worse than that. What I could see how this could be used against people, and as good people who are not willing to take a vaccine, or good people who are not willing to go along with our program, will have to go to the black market to survive, to live. And then at that point, as Ed pointed out, now you're a target for a black bag over your head and you're arrested and never to be seen again, since our constitutional rights at that door are out. Speaking of that, Ed, our Constitution, of course, you can't have the United States Constitution to have this new world order. They don't go hand in hand, just by the nature of the essence of what they're about. For this to work, for a banker cartel to take over this world, for this to work, there has to be almost all the key countries in the world have to participate in this one world currency. Otherwise, you're not going to have complete control. I mean, that's one of the mechanisms, is the currency to control, as we know how it controlled the United States through history and brought us to where we are today, to our knees. Same way will have to happen on a world level. What countries are not willing to participate yet in this? Is Russia involved? China involved? And what do you know on an international level?
That's a good question. I'm not aware of any major country that's really resisting this in any way. Sometimes I'll hear about some little country that I have to go look it up and see where it is. I say, oh, yeah, okay, there. I remember now where that country is. I hear rumors that they're not wanting to go along with it. But typically what happens then is that somebody in the State Department says, oh, that's a rogue country and they're harboring terrorists or something like that, and we invade them. And we force their leaders into exile, or they get suicided or something like that. And then that's over. Now that's one less country. I really, at the moment, maybe Alex is on top of this. He's on top of all the data. Maybe Alex knows of a country, but I can't think of a major country that's excluded from this at all.
Iran or North Korea, are they on the Rothschild dime, Alex?
I think Iran and North Korea, especially. I did a cover story in the New American about how North Korea has been a pawn of the globalist establishment, literally going straight back to the start. I mean, they're obviously puppets of communist China, but when you understand the reality of communist China and who put them there and how the Rockefellers and the Rothschilds built them up into this global superpower, it all starts to make sense.
Right.
The one that I can think of just until recently that was not cooperating fully with the system was the mass murderer Muammar Gaddafi. Now, this is not a defense of Muammar Gaddafi. The guy was brutal. He was a totalitarian, but he was not cooperating. And we know from the WikiLeaks, he was talking about creating a global, a gold-backed currency and selling oil to whatever nation wanted to buy it and bypassing the dollar. And suddenly he went from valued terror war ally who was torturing people for George Bush to, oh my goodness, he's a monster. He's killing his own people. We need the UN Security Council to authorize an invasion. I have authorized American forces to invade. It just happened like that. And then we know now from the WikiLeaks documents why. He wanted a gold-backed currency and didn't want to play along with the monetary scam anymore. And that's what happens. Just like Ed said, they come up with some stupid excuse and there's genocidal maniacs all over the planet. They don't care about genocidal maniacs. They are genocidal maniacs. The problem was he didn't want to play ball with the money scam.
Right. Well, that's history, and that just goes to show, and it shows you how our country could be stopped for 6 months by the power and influence of these globalists and these banker cartel, because I would have never thought I'd see my own fellow Americans falling for this this hustle, this scam to the level that they are. I've just really been shocked. Every time I go out to a store, I just see these little kids now wearing masks, and they're all indicative, in my opinion, of the compliance and ignorance of what truly is going on this world play that we're seeing unfold right in front of our own eyes. So, Ed, I mean, okay, everybody's involved. Everybody knows about it, right? Except the individual waking up to it. So it looks like it's going forward. We're going to be going through this process to whatever it may be. Let's assume the majority of Americans are not going to be waking up, or they'll wake up, it's too late, whatever it may be. It may be a little too far down the line. But there has to be a country, a system, somebody has to be in charge to have the control in their hand to push delete, whether they want somebody deleted out of the monetary system or not. Somebody has to be pulling this, and certain countries have to be, or I would assume certain countries, and this goes for Ed or for Alex, certain countries have to be running this and making these decisions for the rest of the world. Am I wrong on that?
Well, I think you're right on target with that. It's always a problem though when you start to say, okay, what countries are they? That's pretty easy. I think we talk about the Anglo-American establishment. That pretty well is it. You've got Great Britain and the United States. Great Britain because of the royalty and the history and the tentacles that are in so much of the world underneath the surface. And of course, you've got the United States because of its economic prowess in the recent decades and its great military force and all of that. So what more do you need? So it's easy to see that it's the UK and the US involved, but then who are the people? Well, then you start getting into a shadow area. You can surmise. I mean, it's pretty easy to figure out. It's got to be the Rothschild family. It's got to be the Rockefeller family. And maybe there's some remnant of the Morgans and so forth. But you go down that list, and the first thing you know, you have to face reality is that people like myself, we're not invited to those meetings. So we can't look around the room and see who's at the table. We don't really know. It might be some royalty from the Netherlands. We just don't know who goes to these meetings. Yeah. But the final analysis is it doesn't make any difference. We're up against this juggernaut. And we know that they're the top people. What are we going to do? Say, well, we've got a name of a person, so now what are we going to do? So we got the name. We still have to defeat the system. We have to unravel the cloth, so to speak. And that's I think that's what we should be focused on, is that not who as an individual or what group. We certainly don't want to be looking at identity politics to solve this problem. We don't want to say it's a race or it's an ethnic group, or it's a national group, or it's a wealth group, or anything. It's not a group. folks. The groups don't exist. It's one of my favorite things. Only people exist. And if you start to evaluate a person's merits or demerits on the basis of what group they belong to, I think you've made a mistake unless you're in open combat on the battlefield and everybody's wearing a uniform. You can say all the guys with the brown uniform are coming to kill you. Then I could understand some argument for that. Yeah. But other than that, intrinsic identity to a group because of some mental condition or loyalty or something like that is a huge mistake. We need to be looking at the mechanisms that they use to enslave us.
I concur, Ed, with you. And Alex, I think he brings a good point because, it'll probably be a countryless place where people will be pulling these decisions. It will come down to people. But at the same time, you have countries like, Rothschild's have big influences. You have countries like Israel, who's now becoming the AI mecca. You just talked about AI being a center point for controlling this currency. I mean, they're moving Google. Everybody's moving to Israel right now and having control over the artificial intelligence programs more than ever before. Do you see them being a major player in the currency, the electronic currency transition that we're going through now?
Well, I think just by the nature of the Israeli economy, which is very focused on high technology, very focused on digital things, yes, it's going to be an important player. And we would be fools to think that the state of Israel is the one country in the world that is not governed by the establishment. It is ludicrous. In fact, I know a lot of radical, really hardcore Zionists who would just die for the idea that God gave that land to the Jews, who despise Netanyahu and who they consider to be kind of a Rothschild-controlled cabal, very much like what we have in the United States or what you have in Great Britain. And so, I don't think Israel per se is the problem, but I do think it's going to be an important country as we move forward. We actually saw Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu not too long ago, and this was reported in the Jerusalem Post, propose that all children be microchipped to protect us from the coronavirus. But ultimately, when we're looking at who is really at the center of this, I tell people, I think their commander-in-chief is Satan, just straight up. I think we're just dealing with evil, and that's the truth. So, the precise identities and the precise roles, and this guy's the managing director or whatever, is less important than the fact that we are in a battle against absolute evil. They would kill, murder, enslave, rob, every horrible thing you can think about. They would gladly do it to you if it would advance their power. So we need to expose them. I did a special report in the New American called Deep State, Pulling Strings Behind the Scenes. For people who really do want to know names, I've given a lot of talks on that. You can find them on YouTube if you look really hard, because YouTube does their best to bury them. But I go through all the organizations, the secret societies, Skull and Bones, the Bohemian Grovers, the Council on Foreign Relations, the Trilateral Commission, the Bilderberg, all these groups, and they're all important. They're all important players in the architecture. But I don't know that any one particular one is the mastermind behind all of them. But, as Ed explained, the individual names and identities are less important than the system they've created, the mechanisms that they use to control and deceive us. And I think that's where we really need to focus our efforts in terms of exposing this evil. And I do think exposing the evil is one of the most important things that an average person can do. You educate yourself, and then you inform others. I mean, that is how we can stop these people, is by exposing them. And for Christians out there, that's a biblical command. Ephesians 5:11, have no fellowship with the unfruitful works of darkness, but expose them and reprove them. So if you see evil, and what these people are doing is evil, make no mistake, you have an obligation to expose it and to reprove it.
Excellent. And let's go there, Ed. Let's talk about some solutions, real practical, pragmatic solutions. And let's go under the assumption, if you guys, at least for my sake, that Trump's not our solution, that Trump is, he's just, let's put him in a neutral position. He doesn't have the power to make change at this point on a collective level in America. So let's start with America first. What can our citizens do now, knowing that they're moving forward very quickly with a one world currency? Of course, everything else that comes along with that, the currency being, I see, is going to be in the number one way how they're going to persuade everybody to do what the totalitarians want them to do by getting them on the system, whether they're chipped with, RFID chips, or if they're being controlled through some digital currency process, tattoo, whatever it may be. Once that's in place, at that point, I think it's nearly impossible to organize, or at least maybe it's never not impossible, but prior to that, we're not there yet. We're close, Ed. But what can we start doing now as Americans? And Alex said the number one thing, of course, is awareness, and I get that. But what feet on the ground can we do now to stop this one world currency, this one world movement, because they're playing us like a fiddle right now. I mean, every step of the way. The Black Lives Matter is all propaganda for Marxism. So is with Antifa. All this work you're seeing, yours just said earlier, for a better movement of getting legislation passed. Our legislators assume they're all bought out too and sold. You know, majority of them at least, maybe except Massey. So what do we do, Ed? All this is on your shoulders, Ed. Ed Griffin.
Ed Griffin. Oh, we're good. All right. I'm up to this. Actually, I think about that a lot, and because in a war like we are in, and this is a real war, maybe the most complete war that mankind has ever been in, because it's primarily a war for the mind now, and there's technology added on top of it. It's different than all the wars of the past. You don't play around. You can't afford to say, well, let's come up with a solution that sounds good, but we know it deep in our heart it won't work. You have to be very, very pragmatic on our solutions. And it's always troubled me because I don't want to be pessimistic, but I do want to be realistic, and I have to look at in my own mind. Now, I'm not talking about what other people should do. I'm thinking about what should you do, Edward? And so I'll jump to the point here. I've always believed, and I still do, that revolution in the streets is not going to do it. There are a lot of people among our friends who still sort of believe in the old, lock and load approach to patriotism. Well, if they come for my guns, I'm going to tell you they're going to pry it from my cold, dead hands. Well, they're planning on that. Exactly. And people don't realize the power of the weapons that are in the hands of our enemies right now. This is not the same when you go meet the British at the Concord Bridge, and it just depends on how many soldiers are there and how many muskets are there. All the muskets are the same. No, it's not that way anymore. I mean, we have biological weapons, atomic weapons,
drones,
energy weapons, all kinds of things. So we got to get realistic about that. But anyway, that's not how we lost our freedoms. Anyway, even if that weren't the case, we lost our freedoms because we weren't diligent. We didn't watch. We didn't care. We let it go. We were too busy with our pleasures and our entertainments and so forth. And so now it's easy to say, well, so we got to retake our system the same way we lost it. How did we lose it? Well, we lost it organization by organization. We lost control of the political parties. We lost control of the schools. We lost control of the media and so forth. That's how we have to take it back. Easier said than done. How do you take it back? All right. Let's get realistic now. Yeah, how? We're running out of time. At noon, all right? We got to do this by noon. It seems like that's the urgency of this. And, okay, now to my point. It was just the other day I put up a video that I saw from our friend Max Egan. I believe he's in Australia. And it was very well done. And when I say put it up, I put it on our website, which is redpilluniversity.org. I'll get a little plug there.
Yeah, we'll put that up.
All kinds of great messages there, redpilluniversity.org. And I looked at this and I said, this has got to go to the top. And here's why I thought it was so important. First of all, he did a great job, I thought, of doing an overview of all of the areas, all the fronts that are moving against us. A great overview of getting the picture, how big it is and how serious it is. Okay, that's good by itself. But then the thing that hit me, he used the phrase several times. He said, he likes to use the word folks. So he said, folks, the sleeping masses are going to sweep us into slavery. And he said that several times. And about the second or third time, I was saying to myself, you know what? The sleeping masses are going to sweep us into slavery. It's sunk in. Now, I always knew that. But the way he said it, I thought, wow, that really penetrates. This is our emergency right now. The sleeping masses. It doesn't make any difference what we do and what we think and how smart we are and how many copies of the Constitution we hold up. And so you can't do that because the Constitution protects me. You can't, that doesn't work anymore. The sleeping masses are going for it. See them on the street, driving down the street with masks on. They're asleep, poor folks. They don't know. They're good people, but they're asleep. So now I come to my point, which is, what do? We don't do anything realistic to save our liberty and restore the system and move beyond until we can awaken the sleeping masses, or at least a big chunk of them. Now, I don't believe we have to mobilize all of them, but we have to get the basic message that we're talking about here today. Maybe not quite so intense about you don't have to know about the Federal Reserve and that it's a banking cartel and all these things. If you're a student, fine, but the sleeping masses aren't interested in those details. All they want to know is that their monetary system is being used to enslave them, which is what it's important anyway. So to answer your question, I think our total focus right now, before noon, is to do everything we can to get this message out to as many people as we can, not just to the choir. We got to get it to those people that think we're crazy. We got to get it to those people that really don't like us because they think we're killing people because we don't go along with it. Whatever it is, we can't let that get in the way. We have to design our message and our efforts so that we reach the sleeping masses and wake them up before noon. That's my answer.
Brilliantly stated. And you know what? And when you look at it from the not riots, but from the protests, from the people screaming out the Constitution, it's real. A lot of it's fallen on deaf ears if the masses amount of people, the majority of the people, are still not listening. Because, like you said, that's why if everyone today took their masks off in defiance, said we're not going along with it anymore, game over. House of Cards falls apart. It's done deal. Once there's no compliance, then there will be no new world order. So, Alex, with that said, brilliantly said by G. Edward Griffin, as expected, but censorship seems to be, I mean, we're censored on Facebook and YouTube. We got our own website. We have a lot of listeners there. But point is, censorship is alive and real, and it's everywhere. And it seems to be more so now than ever before. So getting the message out, at least through the internet aspects, more so now than ever before, is not the same. What are the messages? What are the ways can we get the message out to the masses, as Ed just mentioned, because that's really the ultimate solution?
Yeah, I would say two primary things, and they're both summed up right here. Print magazines. If you're not yet a subscriber to the New American Magazine and to the other publications out there that are physical publications, you should be. First of all, because it helps fund the important work of investigating this stuff. Second of all, because if we're in a war, and we are, as Ed quite properly explained, you can't fight a war without intelligence. In fact, if you try to fight a war without intelligence, you're doomed before you even put on your uniform, right? It's over. If you don't know what's going on, you're done for. And so we need to wake up the American people about who they are, right? Sun Tzu said it really, really well. I always go back to his quote about warfare. Said, if you don't know your enemy and you don't know yourself, you're going to lose every single battle. You might as well not even go out on the field. You're done. You're cooked. Just surrender. Lay down your weapons. If you know yourself and you know your enemy, you need not fear the result of 100 battles. And so we need to get back to an understanding as Americans of who we are as a people. What is our history? What is our heritage? Where did we come from? And also who the enemy is, which is a big part of what we talked about today. Now, how do we bring about that awareness? Well, I think the internet is going to become increasingly less useful as a tool. That means we're going to have to go back to what worked prior to the internet. So come to the Red Pill Expo in Jekyll Island in October, assuming that the government doesn't force us to shut it down. That's going to be a wonderful opportunity to get access to the information, to network with other people who think like you, to form connections, get subscriptions to the New American Magazine. And finally, this special report that I'm holding up right here is called Rescuing Our Children. This has been my kind of mission for the last 2 years now. We have got to rescue our children. Right now, I would say one of the most important weapons, if not the most important weapon in the hands of the enemy in this war is our children. And people hear that and they're like, oh my goodness, my children are not a weapon in the hands of the enemy. Oh, yes, they are. They're sitting for 12 years, for 8 hours a day, for 5 days a week, being indoctrinated, being confused, being weaponized, being dumbed down, and they are being trained to be little soldiers in the war against you and your family and your church and your liberty and your country and your constitution, all of it, right? That is why, and I loved that President Trump pointed that out in his speech. The reason we have the mayhem in our streets is because our children have been indoctrinated in the public schools. If we want to stop that, and right now it's something like 85%, or at least until coronavirus, 85% of our children were spending 12 years in government indoctrination centers masquerading as schools. We have got to turn the tide. We never should have handed our children over to the government to begin with, right? Government's got some important functions and roles. They should protect my rights. They should make sure no one kills me or robs my property, but they should not be educating my children. So parents, pull your kids out of the brainwash camps. The government made it easy for you now, right? You're not even allowed to go without a face diaper and a glass box and all the rest. Get your kids out of the stupid system. Start educating them at home in a homeschool program. Start up a co-op at your church or with other people in your community. Get them in a good private school. We've got an online private school, Freedom Project Academy. Great option if that's if that's your thing. If you don't feel competent to homeschool, there's so many options today. It's never been a better time to pull your children out of the government school, and that way you can train up your children to think, to love liberty, to understand what we're dealing with, rather than turning them into the equivalent of Pavlov's dogs who salivate every time the establishment gives the command. So we've got to get serious on this. And again, internet, I don't think will be a useful tool for too much longer. If this continues, we've got to start moving back to what worked. Printed publications, AM, FM radio, physical conferences and speeches. Pastors, get off your butts with all due respect and start telling your congregation what's happening. I think that's one of the big ways that the enemy made so much progress. They silenced all the pastors. Said, 501c3, you can't say anything about anything that might expose what we're doing. And so all the pastors shut up. And so you got 50% of Americans sitting in church every Sunday hearing about, this, that, or the other, but nothing about what's really going on. So those are, my thoughts in a nutshell. Yeah. I'm sure everybody else has got good ideas, but that's my views. So.
I think that's fantastic. And Ed, I mean, just with what he said there, and we're closing out here shortly, I just wanted to say also, I mean, get to know your neighbors. Most of us have just got lost into the distractions of the television. And I would say put the television down. Stop watching television because this is the tool of the banker cartel to keep you distracted and listen to what they're telling you. So if you are going to do that, vet it out very carefully of information like the Red Pill Expo, which I do want to talk about for a second, Ed, because I think this is probably a most critical time than ever before, is to have organizations like this, and there's many more, and I think you guys mentioned a few other ones too as well, but this is one that you two are associated with. And tell me about the Red Pill Expo, Ed. What's the purpose of it, and why was it created? And we'll talk about the event coming up in October.
Well, thanks for that, because that's very much on my mind. In fact, I have been devoting most of my life in the last year and a half to Red Pill Expo and its mother or sister organization, the Red Pill University. They're different aspects of the same thing. And they were created because indirectly what I said a moment ago, we have to reach out to large numbers of people. First of all, it's important, I think, to understand that a movement cannot really last unless it has at its center some very well-informed and driven people that are willing to dedicate their lives to an idea. I mean, literally dedicate their lives to it. And that means their wealth, everything, like our founding fathers, our lives, our fortune, and our sacred honor. So that's what made the American Revolution, because there were maybe 100 people, maybe 200 people, maybe 500 people at the most that were willing to give their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor. And that made this country. Without that hardcore, a small number, nothing would have happened. But the small number didn't do it alone. They had to reach out to their brethren in the field. They had to reach their neighbors and their friends, their extended families. And we have a battle on our hands. Come help us. So I recognize that occurs over and over in history, that scenario. So I knew that although we had at the center of this a group which we call Freedom Force International, which is that hardcore people that are ready and are giving their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor. We need more people than that. So now we're back to Max Egan's idea. We've got to reach out for more people. And we don't want to try to recruit them into this hardcore because it's too much. They're not ready for that, or that's not their interest. Maybe their family problems keep them tied up to it. Whatever it is, we know we have to reach out. So we developed something called Project Outreach. And the idea was, okay, we've got to take our message and not neutralize it, but sort of make it more popularize it. So instead of talking about the battle between collectivism and individualism and the battle between good and evil and all these things that require some thought, we're just talking about the red pill. Take the red pill, man. Wake up and see reality. See the way it really is. Now, we're talking about the same things, right? But it's a more popular way of approaching these topics. So we gave it a try. The first year, I guess it was 2017, I've forgotten. I think it was 2000. We held our first meeting, our first Red Pill Expo in Bozeman, Montana, of all places, and it was a smashing success. We were delighted. We'd found the key. This was our project outreach, and so we've had several Red Pill Expos now, and we look at that as a means of reaching out to our friends and neighbors who are truth seekers. They know something is wrong. They haven't read all the books. They haven't been students like we have, but they want to know. And so they'll come to these events, or they'll go online to Red Pill University and look at the videos and the programs we have. They're seeking information. They know something is wrong. And this is a much larger group. This is where our hope really lies, is in the Red Pill Project outreach. So that's what it is, how it came to be, and it's really working well. We just have to get going a little faster. We don't have 10 years or 20 years to do this. Noon. We've got to do this by noon, you know?
That's wonderful. And so people want to get involved in the Red Pill Expo or the Red Pill University. I mean, I wish, honestly, looking back, I have 20-year-old kids. I wish I sent them to the Red Pill University rather than where I sent them over the last 4 years. So how can people reach the Red Pill University or the Red Pill Expo? And this event coming up in October, as we gather momentum, just let you guys know, as long as you're willing, UI Media will be help covering that as well. Because I think,
fantastic,
and we're having it down at Jekyll Island, right? Where all the mess started.
Jekyll Island, where the Federal Reserve System was created in secret. It's kind of iconic, you know. And we're not going there to worship these guys or anything like that. We're going there to sort of thumb our nose at them and say, "We're here now, you guys." We're going to tell the ghosts to get off the island. We're there now.
Yeah, new leadership.
Yeah, so the event is coming up on October 11. It's still on the books, and. Okay. And I'm glad to hear so much enthusiasm for it, because we don't want to cancel that thing. Right. I want our people who are just as fired up as we are. I mean, you got to have fire in the belly to fight this battle. But we have to remember, a lot of people aren't really sure yet what's going on. Yeah. So this is a delicate path we have to travel. So anyway, you'll find the information in two locations: redpillexpo.org and then redpilluniversity.org. And the two sort of work together, but you'll find everything about our movement and what's coming up on one of those two sites.
Excellent. And Alex, you want to add anything to that as well as people get in touch with you at the New American magazine in addition to. And we have so many comments here, guys, saying, how do we get our governors to support, finance the Red Pill University? So.
Right.
Well, the first thing is we have to get rid of them.
Yeah. But no, thank you so much for having us, Tim. It's always a pleasure to be with you. Red Pill University, Red Pill Expo are phenomenal. I've been at every one of the Red Pill Expos. The speakers who come there are just, world class. Some of the most amazing people in the liberty movement. Some of the most amazing people on this planet are the people who go there. It's so much fun, so much camaraderie. I really encourage you to come. Really, it's a huge diversity of people with a huge diversity of views. We've had liberals, we've had feminists, we've had Christians, we've had, everybody you could think of across the spectrum, health, political stuff, economic stuff. It's a lot of fun. So go to redpillexpo.org. Really hope to see you in Jekyll Island. For those of you who are not yet subscribers to The New American, go to thenewamerican.com. Right behind me, you can see the website. Right where I'm pointing, you can subscribe for the daily headlines. That's free. You get our 5 most important articles in your inbox every day or every week, whatever you prefer. And then the print magazine is what you really need. That's how you can bypass the big tech giants. You can read it, then you can give it to your neighbor or your pastor or your guy across the street, whoever it is. Get the word out. And thanks again for having me. Share this program, people. The information that you just got from Ed is priceless. It's stuff you're not going to find anywhere else. You're never going to see this on, the Communist News Network or even Fox News, speaking of controlled opposition. It's up to you to take this link, send it to your mom, send it to your neighbor, send it to whoever needs to see it. Send it to your whole email list, better yet, and let them know what's really going on. And thanks again, Tim. Thanks so much, Ed. You guys are amazing. So, amen
to that. Thank you, Alex. And, of course, Ed, thank you so much. You guys have been listening with Ed Griffin, the legend, of course, Alex Newman, who I have so much respect for. It's scary. It's scary times right now, and it's at the same time exciting times, because this is an event that all of us have been waiting for a while. We knew it was coming, and now here it is. It's what's scary, I guess, is our fate's in hands of the people who are wearing masks. And so, listen to what we heard today, guys. Wake up, Let's talk to these folks who wear masks in a way we could reach them. Get them involved in different groups, start getting to know your neighbors, and let's try to get them to take it off one step at a time, because this is where we need to go to. When people are woken up, we're unstoppable, and I know both of you agree, the house of cards will fall apart immediately if we all, the majority of us, step up and do and understand how non-compliance works, and we're very close. I believe we're closer than ever before because of what events are occurring, and people are just scratching their heads as this doesn't make sense. So guys, thank you so much. Remember, do share this, get the information out there. We have some more, we have Wake in Atlanta coming up tomorrow morning, and next week I believe we're talking on the Frequency Wars about the New World Religion. One religion that we're moving into potentially. Should be interesting. Guys, thank you again, gentlemen. Appreciate that. More to come. Stay tuned, guys, and be free.
Thank you for watching Frequency Wars, brought to you by the UI Media Network at uimedianetwork.org, the home of innovative, uncensored, conscious media. Check us out on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube at UI Media Network. And be sure to sign up free at uimedianetwork.org to watch all of our uncensored content. See you next time on Frequency Wars, the next revolution. The UI Media Network and its associates take no responsibility for the opinions and statements made by the talk show hosts or their guests.